The wind blew across the empty junkyard, carrying the sharp smell of rust and oil. Mason kicked aside a broken panel, his boots crunching metal as he walked. It was just another day of scavenging. Nothing special, just scrap, bolts, and old tech. No one wanted. But then he heard something strange, a soft thump, like something moving, hiding, breathing. He froze, listening. Another sound lighter, this time, like a footstep. He wasn't alone. Mason crouched low, pulling his flashlight. From his belt, he moved slowly between two mountains of metal. Light sweeping over bent pipes and smashed drones. Then he saw it. A pile of thin, twisted sheets had been arranged like a shelter. Just big enough for two people to crawl inside. He took a step closer, and something under the sheets moved, fast. And scared, a weak voice came from inside. "Please don't." Mason raised his hands, showing he had no weapons drawn. "It's okay," he said calmly. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." Silence followed, then a soft whimper. Mason slowly peeled back one of the metal sheets. Inside were two figures, a woman and a small girl. Both covered in dirt and shivering. Their skin was a pale bluish color. Bruised and scraped, they were. Aliens, clearly, but not the dangerous kind, just lost and broken. The girl looked about 7, her big eyes full of fear as she hid behind her mother's shoulder. The woman, older, stared at Mason with hollow eyes, her arms shielding her child. "You hungry?" Mason asked gently, pulling out a protein bar from his coat. The girl's eyes locked on it, but the mother didn't move. "We don't want trouble," she said, her voice shaking. "Please go." Mason didn't move. "You'll freeze out." "Here tonight," he said, "and I've seen what the junkyard dogs do to the weak." Still, the mother said nothing. Mason sighed and placed the bar on a metal crate nearby. "If you change your mind," he said, turning to leave. He was 3 steps away when he heard a tiny whisper. "Please don't leave us." He stopped, heart pounding. He turned back to see the girl peeking out, her small hand reaching for the food. The mother watched him, still afraid but not stopping her daughter this time. Mason walked back slowly and knelt near them. "I'm Mason," he said. "Just a scavenger, same as anyone else." The girl munched the food like she hadn't eaten in days. The woman finally spoke. "Sira," she said. "My daughter is Luma. What are you doing here?" Mason asked. Sira hesitated, then looked around. "Hiding," she said. "We ran from bad people." Mason didn't ask more. Not yet. He looked at the shelter, barely holding together, barely big enough to keep them warm. "You'll both die out here," he said. "Let me help." Sira shook her head. "If someone finds us, we die anyway." Her voice was low and full of fear. Mason stood up and looked at the junk around him. He had tools, he had scrap, he had time. "Then I'll build something better," he said, more to himself than to her. Sira looked confused. "Why?" she asked. "Why help us?" Mason didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Luma, who was holding the empty wrapper and smiling just a little. "Because no one helped my little sister," he whispered, more to the wind than to them. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the junkyard. Mason started working, pulling metal, pipes, old blankets, anything he could find. Sira watched, still unsure, still afraid, but she didn't stop him. Hours passed, and the cold air grew sharper. Mason built a box-like shelter with better insulation, just big enough to hide in and stay warm. He brought water, more food, even found an old heating coil, and rewired it by the time the stars appeared in the sky. Sira and Luma were inside the new shelter. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. As Mason sat on an old crate nearby, keeping watch, he felt something strange, not pity, not guilt, something heavier, like responsibility. Sira looked out through the small gap in the shelter wall, her voice quiet. "They'll come looking." She said, "They always do." Mason didn't look at her, but his hand tightened around the wrench in his lap. "Then let them," he said softly. "This time. Someone's here, in the distance, far beyond the junkyard's edge." A pair of eyes watched them from the dark. The figure turned and walked back into the night, whispering into a small device. "I found them," it said, "mother and child. And a human." Mason returned to the junkyard before sunrise, dragging a cart full of scrap behind him. He hadn't slept, not really. Just thought all night about the two frightened faces in that shelter. Something inside him wouldn't let it go. He had seen so much thrown away in his life machines, parts, even people. But Sierra and her daughter weren't scrap. Not to him. The morning air was cold, and the fog rolled between the metal towers like silent ghosts. No one else was around yet. The scavengers wouldn't come for another hour or two. That gave him time. He unpacked his cart quietly, laying out tools, sheets, wires, and a few solar panels he'd been saving. He wasn't just fixing a shelter now. He was building them a place where they could be warm, hidden, and safe inside. The patched-up metal hut. Sierra held her daughter close. She hadn't slept either, not with the fear pressing on her chest like a weight. But when she looked out the gap in the wall and saw the human working again, not asking anything, just building, something shifted in her eyes. She watched him weld a frame, adjust support beams, and connect the heating coil to the solar strip. No hesitation, no fear. Just work, steady and calm, like he had done it 100 times before. Luma crawled to the opening and peeked outside, her eyes wide with wonder. "Is he really making this for us?" she whispered. Sierra didn't answer, because even she didn't know what to believe. They had seen kindness before, but it always had a price. So far, this man had asked for nothing. Mason noticed the little eyes watching him and smiled. Without a word, he took out a small, shiny piece of metal shaped like a star and placed it on a flat rock near the shelter. Then he turned away and kept working. Luma gasped and reached for it, holding it like treasure. She smiled for the first time since. They ran from the raiders. As the sun climbed higher, sounds echoed from deeper inside the junkyard. Voices, boots, crunching gravel, laughter, curses. The other scavengers had arrived, and Mason knew what that meant. Questions, suspicion, and danger. He moved quickly, too. Cover the shelter with scrap that looked like junk, blending it into the surroundings from the outside. It just looked like another trash pile, but inside it was now dry, warm, and safe. He motioned to Sarah to stay hidden and walked out to meet the others. A tall man with grease on his face stepped toward him. "You've been here early," the man said, eyeing Mason's work cart. "What are you hiding?" "Just got lucky," Mason replied with a shrug. "Found a working solar panel deep in Sector 7. The man narrowed his eyes, not convinced, but said nothing. Others began to spread out, picking through the trash heaps, not noticing the small home just steps away from where they stood. Mason stayed close, watching every move, every glance. He couldn't risk anyone finding Sierra and Luma. They had trusted him now, and that meant something. The tall man kicked a broken drone and walked off, grumbling soon. The noise faded as the scavengers moved deeper into the yard. Mason let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He returned to the shelter and tapped the wall softly. The door creaked open just a little, and Sarah looked out, her face tight with worry. "They didn't see you," Mason whispered. "You're safe, for now." She opened the door wider, and for the first time, she stepped outside without fear. She looked around at what he had built, her hands trembling. "It's more than I expected," she said quietly. "Why would you do all this?" Mason looked at her, then at the little girl behind her, clutching the metal star. "Because someone has to," he replied, "and no one else will." The sky turned a soft orange as the sun began to set. The junkyard returned to silence, and the cold crept back in, but inside the shelter, a warm light glowed gently. Mason sat outside, sharpening an old blade, just in case. Sierra watched him through the wall and whispered to herself, "He's not like the others, far above them." Hidden behind broken satellite dishes, a tiny drone floated silently. Its lens zoomed in and captured a single frame of the three figures near the shelter. Then it flew off into the clouds, sending the image to someone who would not be pleased. The next day, Mason arrived earlier than usual. He looked tired, his eyes red from staying up too late, thinking about things he hadn't thought about in years. Sierra and Luma were still inside the shelter, asleep under the thin blanket he had found for them. The heater was working now. Humming gently, pushing back the chill, he smiled when he saw them safe, then got to work quietly, not wanting to wake them. But while he sorted wires and old circuit boards, something kept bothering him, that uneasy feeling from yesterday, when the scavengers came too close, and the way that tall man kept looking at him like he knew something. Mason had been in the junkyard too long to ignore instincts. Someone was watching. He stood and scanned the piles around him. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound, but the silence itself felt wrong. He turned back toward the shelter. More alert now, Sierra stepped out, stretching, her eyes blinking in the morning light. "You're here early again," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep," Mason replied. "Thought I'd finish sealing the roof." Luma followed, holding the metal star he gave her. Still treating it like treasure, she waved at him shyly, and he waved back. That little smile of hers made his chest feel warmer than the heater could ever manage. Sierra knelt beside him as he sorted parts. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low, serious. He looked at her and nodded. She took a deep breath, then began to speak. "My people. We were servants on a trade ship owned by a noble," she said. "My mate died trying to protect us." Mason said nothing, letting her continue. "They wanted to take Luma away for some breeding contract," she said bitterly. "I escaped. Stole a cargo pod and landed here in the junk where no one looks." Mason's jaw clenched. He didn't know everything about alien cultures, but he knew enough to understand what she meant. "They'll look for you," he said, voice tight. "They already are," she replied. "I've seen the drone. It came last night." Mason stood up fast, scanning the skies. "Where?" Sierra pointed toward a half-broken tower of twisted metal. Mason picked up his old rifle, barely worked, but it still made him feel better holding it. "I'll take it down," he said. "No," Sierra said quickly. "You don't understand. They're not just watching us anymore. They're watching you." Mason paused, trying to keep his face calm. "I've dealt with worse," he muttered. But the truth was, this felt different. This wasn't a simple rescue anymore. He was part of something bigger now, something that might not end with just helping a mother and child. Sierra stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If they know you're helping me, they'll come for you too." Mason looked into her tired eyes and didn't flinch. "Then let them," he said. "They'll regret it." That night, he didn't go home. He stayed near the shelter, hiding in the shadows with his rifle and a wrench by his side. The stars above blinked quietly. He didn't trust them either. He kept his ears open, eyes sharp. Nothing came. But he knew they were getting closer. In the morning, Luma offered him a small box made of scrap, filled with wires twisted into a flower. She handed it to him and said, "You're our hero." Mason tried to smile, but he couldn't stop thinking about the drone, about what might be coming. Still, he accepted the gift and nodded. "Thank you," he whispered. "I'll protect you both, no matter what." Far away, in a clean office surrounded by floating screens, a tall alien noblewoman stared at an image on her display. Sierra's face, Luma's eyes, and beside them, a human, tall, dirty, and defiant. "Find them," she ordered coldly, "and burn everything around them to ash." Mason was up before sunrise again. He had barely eaten, barely slept. But that didn't matter anymore. Something had shifted inside him since Sira told him the truth. This wasn't just about shelter now. It was about standing up, about doing what no one else dared to do. The junkyard had always been his world, his quiet place. But now it had a purpose. He carried a rusted crate toward the shelter, this one filled with old tech pieces. Motors, gear drives, wires, sensors. Sarah stepped out when she heard the noise, her face still tired but softer than before. "You don't have to do all this," she said gently. "You've already done more than anyone ever has." Mason shook his head. "I'm not finished," he said. "I'm going to make this place strong enough that no one can take it from you." He worked the entire day without stopping. He welded extra walls into the shelter, covered them with false scrap so it looked like garbage from the outside. He rigged an alarm system using pressure plates and sound sensors from old war drones. He even repurposed a broken helper bot, turning it into a silent scout with motion detection. The junkyard was no longer just trash, it had become his toolbox. And he was building something that mattered. Luma watched with wide eyes, fascinated by how Mason moved, how he used every piece like it had value. Later, she asked if she could help. Mason smiled and gave her a small tool to hold. "Every builder starts somewhere," he said. He showed her how to twist wires, how to check battery levels, how to recycle a power cell. She learned fast, like it was natural for her. "Your daughter's smart," Mason told Sira. She could build her own ship one day. Sira looked at Luma, pride and fear both in her eyes. "If she lives that long," she said quietly. Mason stopped and looked at her. "She will," he said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." But that night, something strange happened. Mason went back to his own shelter, a few stacks away, to get more fuel cells. When he returned, one of the outer traps had been triggered. His alarm light blinked red, a signal that something or someone had stepped too close. He crouched low and listened, but there was nothing. He checked the sensor. It had been reset by hand, not tripped by accident. That meant one thing: someone had been there, and they knew what they were looking for. He hurried to the shelter, knocked twice in a special rhythm so Sira would know it was him. She opened the door fast, panic in her eyes. "They were here," she whispered. "I heard something walking above us, but it didn't speak. It didn't attack." Mason looked up at the junk pile above, already suspecting the truth. Someone was scouting, watching, maybe testing his defenses. The real attack hadn't come yet, but it would, the next morning. He walked to the outer yard where the other scavengers gathered. They were digging through scrap as usual, laughing, trading, lying. But Mason noticed one was missing: the tall man who had asked too many questions before. And he also noticed something else. A part from one of his sensor bots was lying near someone else's cart, like it had been pulled off by force. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. Not yet. He returned to Sira and Luma and said only one thing: "It's time to prepare." For the next 3 days, Mason worked harder than ever. He built a hidden tunnel from their shelter to a nearby pile, an emergency escape route. He created a solar-charged EMP burst that could disable small drones if needed. He didn't tell them everything he was doing, but they could feel its attention, the urgency, the storm that was coming. On the 4th night, just before sleep, Luma crawled over to him and whispered, "Will you leave us when it gets bad?" Mason looked at her, surprised. "No," he said simply. "I've left too many people before." Not again. Outside, the wind howled through the metal towers, but inside the shelter, the little heater hummed and the lights flickered gently. And far in the darkness, someone was setting a marker beacon beneath a pile of trash. A silent signal, blinking red, waiting to bring fire. The attack came just after midnight. It started with silence, not noise, too quiet, like even the wind had been told to stop moving. Mason sat outside the shelter, staring into the dark, something tight in his chest. He could feel it tonight. Was different, then he heard it. A soft click, followed by a faint whir. Motion sensors blinked red. One after the other, then the shadows moved. And figures stepped into view, 3 of them, tall and armored. Their weapons glowing faintly blue in the dark. No words, no warnings, just hunters, sent to take back what they believed was theirs. Mason didn't wait. He slammed his hand on T. The hidden alarm switch, and a siren screeched from deep inside the scrap pile. The shelter's walls dropped down their reinforced plates, and the emergency lights lit up like fire. From behind him, Sira grabbed Luma and held her tight. Both already awake, already afraid. "They've come," she whispered, her voice cracking. The first blast hit the outer wall, metal bent inward, but didn't break. Mason rolled to cover and activated the shock mines he had buried around the shelter. A loud crack exploded as one of the hunters stepped on a plate. His armor lit up with sparks as he dropped to one knee. But the other 2 pushed forward. Weapons raised, Mason grabbed his old rifle, aimed, and fired. The bullet didn't pierce the armor, but it slowed the second attacker, just enough for Mason to toss a gas canister into the path. Thick smoke rose, and he vanished behind it, moving fast to flank them, inside the shelter. Sira pushed Luma through the hidden tunnel. "Go," she said. "Follow the lights. Crawl until the tunnel ends. Then wait." Luma was crying, but obeyed. Disappearing into the darkness of the tunnel, Sira turned back and picked up a metal rod, her eyes fierce now. She had run enough in her life. Tonight, she would fight. Mason ducked behind a wall of scrap and pulled out a remote. He pressed a button, and 2 nearby towers collapsed, metal raining down, blocking the attacker's path. One was crushed under the weight, his glowing weapon flickering out. The last hunter pushed through, stepping over debris, eyes locked on the shelter. But Mason stepped out of the smoke behind him and swung his wrench hard into the back of the helmet. The blow didn't kill him, but it sent him crashing to the ground. Mason grabbed a loose cable and wrapped it around the hunter's legs, shocking him until he stopped moving. It was over in minutes, but it felt like hours. Mason stood over the fallen bodies, chest heaving, hands bleeding. Sira came out of the shelter slowly, eyes scanning the area. "Is it over?" she asked. "For now," Mason said, looking down at the ruined armor and the glowing insignia on the chest plate. It was a royal mark. He knew what it meant. They weren't done. More would come. Worse ones, stronger ones, with fire and ships, and no hesitation. He walked over to the edge of the junkyard, his eyes searching the skies. No lights yet, but he knew what was coming. He turned back and looked at Sira, her face pale in the moonlight. "We can't hide anymore," he said. "Not here." She looked down, silent. Then Luma crawled out from the end of the tunnel. Running into her mother's arms, she looked up at Mason, then at the broken metal and smoke. "Are we still safe?" she asked softly. Mason crouched down and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not yet," he said, "but I'll make sure you are." The shelter was damaged, but still standing. They worked together through the rest of the night, fixing what they could, burying what they had to. Mason didn't sleep. He stayed outside with a tool in one hand and a flashlight in the other, eyes fixed on the horizon. This place had once been just trash. Now it was something worth fighting for. And in a far-off command center, a voice growled after seeing the footage from the scout drone. "Send the purge team," it said. "Burn the entire sector. Bring the girl back alive. Kill the human." The sun rose over the junkyard, but it didn't bring peace. Smoke still drifted from broken towers, and the air smelled like melted metal and fear. Mason stood beside the shelter, covered in dust and dried blood, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. He knew what was coming next. The last attack was only a warning. The real strike would come soon, and it would be worse. Inside the shelter, Sira sat with Luma, brushing dirt from the girl's face. They were quiet, but their silence was heavy. Luma held on to Mason's metal star like it was the only thing keeping her safe. Sira looked at the ceiling and whispered, "We can't run forever." Mason walked in carrying new parts. "I'm not asking you to run," he said. "I'm asking you to hold on." He set the parts down and showed Sira the new design he drew on a piece of scrap. A real defense wall, powered by solar cells and shielded with recycled armor plates. There would be an escape route, but there would also be strength. This time, they weren't just hiding, they were preparing to stay. All day, they worked together. Mason wired power coils while Sarah sorted out batteries and fuses. Luma even helped, holding tools and learning names for each part. The junkyard that once felt like a prison now looked different, live, busy, like it was becoming something greater. A home, not just a hiding place. By sunset, they had reinforced the shelter, added turrets from broken defense drones, and laid out warning lights across the paths. The junk was no longer junk, it was armor, as they finished. A soft beep echoed from a small scanner Mason had placed in the far east pile. Something was coming fast. Mason looked at Sira, and she looked at him. No words were needed. He handed her a radio and told her the code to activate the tunnel shield. If the worst happened, she was to take Luma and run through the escape route. Sira grabbed his hand tightly. "You don't have to die for us," she whispered. Mason didn't answer. He just smiled and walked out toward the hill of metal, where the wind had gone still again that night. The stars were hidden behind smoke and cloud. Luma couldn't sleep, and Sira sat beside her, holding her close. "I miss Papa," Luma whispered, "but I think Mason is like him." Sira's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, yes. She said softly, "He's just as brave." Mason sat near the perimeter, watching as small flashes lit the sky far away. It was coming, the purge team, the Noble's final answer. He adjusted the shield settings, checked the AMP coils, and powered up the turrets. He was one man, yes, but he had something they didn't. He had purpose. He had something to protect. Just before dawn, a figure appeared at the gate. It wasn't a soldier. It was a stranger alien woman with torn clothes and a child clinging to her back. She looked around, desperate and afraid. Mason walked forward and held up a hand. "Easy," he said. "You're safe here." The woman collapsed in front of him, shaking. "They burned the camp," she cried. "We heard about you." We had nowhere else to go. Mason helped her up and brought her inside. Sira offered her food, and Luma gave the small child a blanket. That morning, another came. Then 2 more. Then 6 more, one by one. Aliens from the shadows found their way to the junkyard, following rumors of a human who built safety out of nothing. They didn't come for weapons. They came for shelter, for hope, and Mason gave it to them by the time the sun rose fully. The junkyard wasn't a hiding place anymore. It had become a community, a dozen scared souls, working together to survive. Mason stood on top of a rusted tower, looking down at them, and for the first time in years, he smiled with pride. But above them, deep in the clouds, the purge ship was already locking its weapons. A voice echoed from the cockpit. "Target confirmed." Mason didn't know it yet, but soon the final storm would fall. The sky turned red at dawn, not from sunlight, but from fire above the junkyard. The Noble's purge ship hovered like a dark god, its engines roaring as flames poured from its underbelly. Mason stood at the top of the tallest scrap tower, wind hitting his coat, eyes fixed on the metal beast in the sky. They had come, just like he knew they would. He pressed the warning alarm, and a loud horn echoed across the yard. Everyone below rushed into the shelter tunnels, carrying children. tools, and the hope they had left, Sira guided them with a calm voice, hiding her fear behind firm commands. Luma clung to her mother's leg, staring up at the sky with wide, scared eyes. "Will he be okay?" she asked softly. Sira didn't answer, because she didn't know. Mason activated the solar shield. Bright energy rising around the junkyard's outer shell. The first cannon blast hit the shield, and it held for now. Metal cracked, but the defenses did their job. Absorbing most of the strike, the ship fired again. Harder this time, testing the limits. Mason ran to the control tower, fingers flying across the panel as he triggered his final weapon, an EMP surge powered by every battery he'd stored over. The last year, the pulse exploded upward, slamming into the ship with invisible force. One of its side thrusters failed, and the massive craft wobbled in the sky, but it didn't fall. Instead, a ramp opened, and soldiers began to drop down on cables, landing hard between the junk towers. Heavily armed, silent, and merciless, they moved like shadows, no shouting, just action. Mason grabbed his wrench and sprinted toward them, shouting for the defense. Bots to engage. Old, patched-up drones rolled out of hiding. Firing sparks and throwing scrap like bullets, the battle began. Uneven, but desperate. One of the soldiers charged at Mason, blade raised. Mason dodged and struck the soldier's leg with the wrench, then swung again at the helmet, cracking it open just enough to see the alien inside gasp. But more kept coming. Too many. He was pushed back toward the shelter's edge, fighting with every step, sweat burning his eyes. He fell to one knee but before the blade came down. A flash of metal knocked the soldier aside. Sira stood over him, holding the pipe he had once given her. Breathing hard. "I told you not to die," she said. Helping him up, together they fought their way to the main gate, protecting the entrance to the underground tunnels. If the soldiers got through, the families would be lost. A shot hit Mason's shoulder, and he stumbled. Sira pulled him behind. Cover pressed her hands against the wound. "You can't fall now," she said, voice shaking. "They need you." Mason gritted his teeth and stood again. "I'm not done yet." Just then, a loud crack echoed through the sky. The ship above them shook, its engines failing one by one. Someone inside the ship had triggered a meltdown. Maybe the EMP had damaged the core. Maybe it was a miracle. Either way, the massive ship began to fall, flames trailing from its side. Mason and Sira looked up, stunned, as the sky itself seemed to break apart. "Get back," he shouted, dragging her into a ditch as the purge ship smashed into the far end of the junkyard, exploding in a wave of fire and thunder. Everything went silent, then dark. When Mason woke, the air was thick with smoke. His ears rang, and his body hurt everywhere. He coughed and sat up, dust falling off his back around him. The junkyard was scorched, ruined but not gone. From the tunnel entrance, small heads began to rise. Sira stepped out, carrying Luma in her arms, alive. More survivors followed, blinking in the light, looking at the wreckage and the man who still stood. Mason limped to the center of the yard and dropped his wrench. "It's over," he said, voice rough but full of relief. No one cheered, but they all walked toward him, slowly, silently. Then Luma ran ahead and hugged him tightly, her small voice breaking the quiet. "You didn't let them take us," she said. "You saved us." Sira joined them, placing her hand on his shoulder. "No," she said softly. "You gave us more than safety. You gave us a home." Later, the community rebuilt. Using the ship's wreckage as new shelter walls, more came. Hearing the story of a human who fought alone to protect the helpless. They called him Guardian of Scrap. Mason just called it doing the right thing. And on one quiet evening, as the stars finally shined over a peaceful junkyard, Luma placed the old metal star back into Mason's hand and said, "Now it belongs to all of us."